The Hair Transplant Network is the largest hair restoration community created by patients to help you find the best hair loss treatments and surgeons based on results. Let's get right into it. I before we went live, I asked you, for those of you watching that don't know, the founder of the Hair Transplant Network, Patrick Hennessy, went to go visit Intercytex, which was a hair cloning company in the 2000s. Um, as I'm aware, you were with them from 2003 to 2009.
That's right. I was I wasn't part of the company, but I was the principal investigator for the human clinical trials that we were conducting out of our Manchester clinic at the time. And yeah, I remember clearly when Pat came to visit. Must have been around 2004 or something or somewhere around that time. Yeah, 18 years ago.
Yeah, long
Yeah,
time ago. The
yeah, yeah.
question that everyone has is, back in the 2000s, I remember people were saying, hair cloning is 5 years away or 10 years away. It's going to happen in 2010. Then 2010 happened. Then 2020. It's going to be there's a major website called Hair Loss Cure 2020. So it kind of seems like each year that the bar just keeps going further and further back. Do you think it's going to happen sometime in our lifetime? Is it something that we should look forward to?
So I was at a conference. I was at a conference recently in Spain, and one of the doctors said he tells his patients hair cloning is 5 year is has been 5 years away, 5 years away for the last 10 years, and it'll always be 5 years away. Jokingly saying, of course, but the thing is, you have to define what you mean by hair cloning. So if you're talking about hair cloning as in magically implanting a cell in a bold skin and then it'll grow hair from nothing, then yes, we are not very close to that point. It's very complex, and that is what we tried to do with Intercytex back in the day, and then the Adirans hair research company tried to do that as well. So we've all realized that the target that we set ourselves was ambitious. It's complicated. You can't just. It's not like planting a seed in your garden, and there are multiple factors involved, which is why we in with hair clone, our target is more rejuvenating miniaturized hairs rather than
Mm.
regenerate brand new hairs. That doesn't mean we've given up on the regeneration, but we're hoping that that is number one, an easier target, and there's a lot of people who can be helped that way, but also achieving that goal will help give us more clues and more information that perhaps one day we could reach that ultimate target of regenerating hair from nothing.
So right now, I know previously when I had asked you about, verteporfin, which is kind of blown up, especially with the trials that Dr. Barghouti is doing, and a lot of people are interested in that. But you told me that you guys are not using any medication to regenerate the hair. So what is the method of rejuvenation of the hair follicles rejuvenating? Is it specifically stem cells? How are the hairs being rejuvenated
Yeah.
theoretically?
So, in a lot of the injectable type treatments that are available and people are doing, like say PRP, adipose tissue derived stem cells, Regenera, all these things, you are stimulating, you are extracting certain factors that will
Mm.
stimulate the existing cells in the hair and rejuvenate their hair to various levels of success. What we're doing is we are culturing, we are multiplying the dermal papilla, which is the basic cell that stimulates hair production. It sits in the root of the hair, what's called the bulb. And we are taking a few of these cells and culturing them in the lab to make tens of thousands of them out of the few. Exactly what we were doing 18, 20 years ago. The
Mhm.
difference is that the culturing methods have developed, as you might expect, in all this time, become much more sophisticated, and it means we could predict the quality of the cells that we're producing a lot better. So we culture these cells in the lab, make tens of thousands of them, and the idea is then to inject those cells we made in the lab back close to the hairs that are shrinking away to get these new cells to re-enter the root. Because as many of people listening will know, that when the hair miniaturizes, a lot of these cells escape from the root. So the root ends up with less number of cells, and that's why it produces a thinner hair shaft. So if you increase the number of the cells, you get a thicker hair shaft. So by injecting these cells near the root, the idea is for these cells to enter the root, fill the root with more cells. But we're not only filling it with more cells, we're filling it with cells that come from the back of the head, the ones that are resistant to the male hormone. Hopefully, at some point, if you keep doing that, maybe your root will have mostly cells that are resistant to the male hormone. And if that happens, then there's no reason for the hair to keep miniaturizing.
So let me see if I just to, extrapolate that and kind of put it in layman's terms. Basically, what you guys are doing is taking the genetic information from the sides of your scalp and then transferring that into the top. So you're in a sense like changing the genetic makeup of these hair follicles that would otherwise be genetically susceptible to DHT.
So
Am I understanding?
we are changing. Yeah, the ultimate result is we're hoping to change the type of the cell in the root that produce the hair from hormone sensitive to hormone resistant.
That I think is very intriguing. Now, I guess the only thing that people, when they think of cloning, right, they think of creating multiple hair follicles.
Yeah.
This really isn't necessarily cloning; it's more of genetic altering, I would say, or something along those lines. Injecting a DHT-resistant cell into a non-DHT resistant cell, and then converting that into be the main cell, right? So that's how it would.
Correct. But we are but the cells that we're taking from the back, we are multiplying them, or if you like, photocopying them and making more of them. And that is the cloning bit. Although strictly speaking, it's not exactly hair cloning, because hair cloning is creating an exact replica.
Okay. I get it. So that
I guess cell multiplication is the more scientifically correct term.
one thing that I've heard that has been brought up a lot, even among doctors, is that there's a fear that when you multiply these cells, that they could become cancerous cells. Is there any fear of that in your guys' practice, or what do you have to say about that?
No, because we and others have done that before, multiplied these cells and re-injected them into the people who donated the cells in the first place, like we did with Intercytex all that time ago. And obviously, long enough period has passed, and that those tests have shown that that has not happened.
One question that came in is, when would this be a treatment that is readily available to the masses? Right. So, and I know that's a very hard, difficult question, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that come into play. But if you would give us an approximate.
So, in order for a treatment to be available to the masses, so to speak, it needs to be licensed in many countries. And in order for a treatment to have a license, it needs to go past human trials. And once the human trials prove effectiveness, then it gets licensed in wherever you did the trial. For example, you need to do a trial in the United States, a trial in the United Kingdom, a trial in whatever country. So the hair clone approach is to use the treatment on a limited basis, on a doctor to patient basis. And then, so it's not going to be available to the masses, it's only available on a limited basis, doctor to patient. And in the UK, there is provision for that. We are allowed to do that, just like, say, when we prescribe oral minoxidil, for example, it's called off-label prescribing. It cannot be advertised. You cannot sell it to the masses, but in your own practice, you could recommend it to patients. And the same thing we can do with the cell therapy this way. And we're going to use that principle to collect the data, establish a protocol that allows us then to do multi-center clinical trials around the world, so that then the product becomes licensed. Once it becomes licensed, then multiple doctors around the world will be able to prescribe that or apply it to their patients. In the meantime, we can only apply that treatment in the UK because the regulators allow us to do that in the UK.
So currently, no other country is pretty much looking at. I know that you guys were given a grant in 2020, right?
Correct. Yeah. So
But
in the
that was
UK,
specifically for the UK.
So we were given a grant to help our research and development, and that is from a UK authority. That's a UK grant, and obviously they give it to the UK because that will help develop UK industry. It's basically to promote the UK brand, and we have been very thankful for that. But we also have a number of clinical partners who around the world who also contribute to our research and knowledge, etc. But the classic way to get a treatment license is you do studies on non-humans, typically the mouse, and then you prove your concept, and then based on that, you enter a clinical trial. Sadly, a lot of clinical trials, if not most of them, fail because you find that the mouse, what works in the mouse, doesn't necessarily work in the human. And then by then you've spent tons of money and expense, and then it's very difficult to come back because, by then you and everybody who supported you have run out of money. And that's kind of what happened with Intercytex back in the day. So what we're doing is we're using this allowance we have in the UK to prove our concept on the human model right away. We're not working with mouse. And once we have that, when we enter a clinical trial, the trial will be predicted to be a lot more successful because the data we're using is human data rather than mouse data.
And how far are we from that, from starting the trials?
So we were supposed, the trials will come after we have established a protocol. To establish a protocol, we need to treat a particular number of patients in the UK. We estimate that is probably a 2-year process. That 2-year process should have started probably about 2 or 3 years ago, end of 2019, beginning of 2020, before the world shut down and all the universities shut down. Because we're working with 3 universities that have been out of action until earlier this year. So we are hoping that we'll start treating the first of our volunteers maybe at the end of this year or the beginning of 2023, and we keep treating people for the next year or 2 after that. We can treat anybody who wants to be treated, but it's not going to be advertised and it's not going to be available anywhere in the world. Once we have that number of people we need to have valid data, so that when you go into clinical trial, you have enough data to sort of justify spending the money. So to give you a timeline, you're talking about 1 or 2 years of treating people on a doctor to patient basis. After that, then you enter a clinical trial that may take a couple of years. And then after that, perhaps you'll have a licensed product.
So before, I remember, Hair Clone was making a lot of waves in the media in 2019. I remember that was specifically there were some articles that came out on Lab Bible and about the hair follicle banking and cryo and freezing them. And so that coincides directly with right at that time, you guys were going to start those, get the ball rolling. But then obviously we all know what happened in 2020, which has caused I would say 2-year delay. Now things are starting to open up everywhere. But so now from this point forward, maybe another 2 to 3 years.
We've got another 2 years, yeah, of actually treating real patients.
Yeah.
So the reason those stories came out in 2019, mainly because we started the hair follicle bank. So where we made it available, people can, especially mostly people who are having hair transplants, and we made them aware that this is going to happen. And if you're having a hair transplant, you may wish to store, say, 100 of your hair follicles, cryopreserve them in the tissue bank, because when the treatment becomes available, then number one, you don't need to have another surgical procedure. We can go and get your hairs from the bank and multiply them. But the second thing is that there is an argument to store your hairs while they are younger. There is no definition of young and old, but the younger the hairs that you use, the younger the cells that you use for this process, the better quality hairs you will get. So let's suppose you bank your hairs when you're 25 years old and you use them when you're 35. The general idea is that your hairs are still 25 years old because you've cryopreserved them. So people were banking their hairs because number one, they're having a procedure anyway, but number two, said, well, I'll store them now because whenever that treatment becomes available, I could then rely on younger hairs. So that's why those stories came out, but also because we were hoping that we're going to start these treatments fairly soon, because we work with Birmingham University, Imperial College in London, and the cells were going to be cultured at Newcastle University. So, and sadly, of course, over COVID, all these institutions were put on hold.
So one of the questions coming to my mind is, the 25 versus 35, the hair follicles being better when they're younger. Is it because of like senile alopecia, or is it just because the cells are I guess more alive? What would be the difference between, getting it done when, let's say, you're 50, or getting it done when you're 25 versus 50? What's the main concern?
No, it's not senile alopecia. It's just it's the aging process. In the labs that we work with, regardless of hair clone, we do a lot of research with other universities that's not related to hair clone, and we've always known that when we use hair from volunteers who are younger, the hairs culture much better. You get much better quality results. And we were involved in a research with one of the universities at Bradford University that showed that the stem cell proliferation and sort of the response of the cells when they come from a younger patient is much more solid. You get much better quality response. So there is proof that hair ages just like other cells in your body, and it affects proliferation of the cells. It affects how the cells develop. So, and there are known stem cell markers that are related to aging, making this point significant. And again, that made us realize that if you are going to have your hair multiplied, it might be better if it's available to you that you use hairs that are younger rather than older. You get a better quality product.
Right. And what about the concern of people saying, well, what if I get this treatment done when I'm 25? Does that mean my hairs are going to start declining as I age? Meaning, are you going to have to continue to do this treatment every so often to keep up with the results? Or would it be a one and done treatment?
We certainly expect it to be definitely more than one treatment. However, not indefinite. So what I was saying before is that the general principle is that we want these cells that were multiplied in the lab to re-enter the root and repopulate the root with more cells. So we envisage that then this root has a mixture of cells, some of the old ones that want to continue to go bald, and some of the new ones that are resistant to balding. So we anticipate that you may need a few of these treatments. Who knows, maybe 2 or 3 treatments, at least once every hair cycle, so that it comes to a point when the root has a majority of cells that we've introduced that are resistant. When it comes to that point, then the root is now perhaps not a balding root anymore, and now it's a non-balding root because the cells that are making the hairs came from the non-balding variety.
Mm. How does one become a part of this, I guess, trial or this experiment? How I know that right now you're collecting data based on actual people choosing to get the treatment, but how do you one of those people? Do you have to contact Hair Clone
So
or?
yeah. So the way Hair Clone has worked is that it's established a number of partners around the world. For the example, there are quite a few in the United States, for example,
Hmm,
and these partners are either partners who have been licensed to be able to do the hair banking, or they've been licensed to be able to do both the banking and the treatment. So let's suppose you are a patient in, say, San Francisco or LA or New York.
hmm,
You can go to the local hair clone, hair transplant doctor who is a partner,
hmm,
and you are able to have a consultation just like you would do normally. And
hmm,
if they think you are a good candidate for the treatment, then they could cryopreserve the hair follicles for you. They could do the extraction, just like having FUE. They could send the follicles to the bank, and then when the treatment becomes available, then and that patient wants to have that treatment, they could go back to the doctor asking to have the treatment. But until we have a licensed product, if that person from overseas wants to have the treatment at the minute, they will have to travel to the UK to have the treatment before the license.
okay. So if
So the
anyone is
treatment is not
watching this,
restricted to UK people, but it's restricted in location in the UK.
got it. So if you live in somewhere else in the world, New York or something, you can go and get your hair follicles frozen, but you can't receive the treatment there in New York. You would have to
Correct.
travel to the UK to do both, to freeze
Until
your hair
correct.
follicles
No, you can have your follicles preserved locally in wherever
in
we
New
have the
York.
partner. But to have the treatment, you'll have to travel, and that is the case. Will continue we have until we do clinical trials, and then the trial results in the product becoming licensed, for example, in the United States, and then all the partners in the United States will be able to offer those treatments from their offices.
Got it. A question just came in here in the chat of mine. Big fan of Dr. Farjo, had my HT in Manchester, thanks to him. My question is, do we expect this to produce better results than a normal FUE procedure?
Right. So no, it is not. It is not necessarily an alternative to a hair transplant. It is more like an alternative to non-surgical treatments. So
Mm,
the treatment at the minute is about rejuvenating and preserving the hair that is still on its way out. If you've lost enough hair to have a transplant, it may be too late to rejuvenate those hairs, just like it's too
mm,
late to use finasteride or minoxidil or any type of injectable. So we envisage that, until we get to the point where we are regenerating hairs, this is either a treatment for you to not go bald, or to work on areas that you would not have a transplant on, areas that need preserving. But any area where you've lost the hair from and it's gone bald, then you'll still need an FUE or an FUT procedure, whatever it is you choose to have.
mm. Got it. So this treatment is not for someone who, let's say, is a Norwood 6, who, says, look, I've lost my hair. I want to get my hair back. It's not going to be something that's going to rejuvenate those hair follicles that are already past the point of no return.
Not at the level of knowledge and research that we are at now. Nobody else in the world is able to promise that at this moment in time. When I see people at consultations who are coming in for hair transplantation, I mention the banking and the possibility of hair clone in the future to people who are still in the process of losing hair. Somebody know
Mm,
with 6, I don't even talk about that because it's too late for them.
mm. So this would be probably the perfect alternative for someone who may be like a diffuse hair loss. So maybe they have the Norwood 6 pattern, but they still have all their hairs, on their head, and maybe it's only visible if the hair is wet, but they have, you know, all of the hair is intact. Where or a treatment could rejuvenate those to be, fully terminal hairs.
Yeah,
Would
it needs hair to work with. It needs hair to work with. Think of it as anybody who's a candidate for medical therapy, anybody who's a candidate for PRP or other type similar is a candidate for this procedure. You can ask, well, why do I need to bother with that? I can take finasteride or minoxidil or PRP. It's true. It's just that the principle is different. These are stimulated treatments that you have to keep taking. They're not one day going to say, okay, now I don't need to take any more finasteride or minoxidil. Whereas with what we're talking about, there is a possibility that you have a number of treatments and then the hairs become in a state where you don't need to treat them anymore because the cells that are making these hairs have changed from the balding to the non-balding.
Now, one question that everyone's gonna ask is, what are the side effects? Are we messing with something that could, in fact, harm us? Do more harm than good. You mentioned finasteride, you mentioned minoxidil. Uh, there's a school of thought on both medications, right? There's people who are very fearful of finasteride. There's websites, warning you about finasteride and the side effects. Same thing with minoxidil. I personally use oral minoxidil and I don't have any issues. But a lot of people are, saying that it can harm your heart and it's dangerous. So, good alternative to people who feel that way.
Sure.
Um,
Or people who do not want to continue using medications all the time. You mentioned side effects. Everything has a side effect and complication. Well, it's an injectable, so it involves coming into clinic. You have to have maybe anesthetic or maybe not. There's a little bit of degree of discomfort. There's going to be a cost to it, of course.
yeah,
Yeah,
that goes without saying. Yeah.
yeah. But regarding are the cells going to be harmful? In theory, yes, but we know from experience and from the trials we did in the past that that is not the case. Remembering that we're injecting people with their own cells, so this is autologous. We're not introducing tissue from someone else.
Hmm. Where, if someone comes and says, Dr. Farjo, I want this data. Where's this data? Can you give me some data? Because of course, a lot of people are very analytical and they want to see, where is this information? Is there any information available
So the
anywhere
yeah,
online?
so the research, the research into the work that we're doing is well established and goes back quite a long way, and the proof of concept has been done. But regarding data specific to exactly what we do on our own patients, and that data is not available yet. But obviously, when with time, we'll make it available when we have enough data. But the proof of the principle has been established for quite a long time from papers published where they showed that they take cells from one part. They took cells from a human and injected them into the mouse and showed that the new hair growing actually came from cells that were introduced into that part of the body. And
Mm,
people like in a similar way, what's that company called? Replicel have
Replica, yeah.
been working on a similar principle as well.
We got another question. The biggest question will always come down to cost. Why would someone do this semi-clinical procedure for an expense when things like finasteride and minoxidil are relatively cheap? Is there an estimate of the cost?
So we don't have an exact cost yet, and the major cost up front is going to be the cost of the lab of the universities. This is going to be the biggest stumbling block. And at the beginning,
Mm,
you expect these things probably will be quite expensive, maybe on a par with a hair transplant procedure in terms of
mm,
cost, because laboratory time, manufacturing time of the cells is quite expensive. The cost will come down when this process becomes perhaps automated, when we
mm.
reach to a level where we can process quite a lot in the one session, and therefore the cost per patient becomes quite less. Exactly how much, I don't know, but certainly it's going to be at the beginning comparable to the cost of a hair transplant in Western Europe and the States, not in Eastern Europe and
Yeah,
Middle East.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be the tough one, I guess. When that time comes, I would think that you would need to have some concrete information, because there are some clinics that do that with PRP. The PRP is as expensive as a hair transplant. Now, my personal theory is always opt for the hair transplant, as it's a more proven method. I mean, of regrowing your hair. So I guess if it comes down to this point, you'll have to whoever's getting it will have to wrestle with the idea of either, getting a hair transplant and knowing this is going to actually grow, or doing something a little bit more holistic, where you're not removing as much hair from your donor, you're not creating as much scarring. I mean, there are pros and cons definitely to opting to do this. Another question would be, would the amount of growth or rejuvenation be comparable to a hair transplant? I mentioned earlier someone being a diffuse Norwood 6 or having diffuse loss, where maybe at a glance you're not seeing that they are losing a lot of hair, but under bright lights they are. Would this be something where I get a treatment or two, now my hair looks like I never went bald, like I was not balding at all?
Mm. As long as that starting point is not baldness. So if you have somebody who has thinning hair and you can, with a transplant, you can double the amount of coverage, then theoretically it's possible. The only thing is that we are not increasing the numbers of the hairs, we are increasing the hair shaft diameter. And sometimes doubling the hair shaft diameter can be almost the same as increasing the numbers of the hairs. So this is not, when you say, we're not, I see, the confusing thing is that I've got two hats on here. I've got the
Yeah,
hat on the Farjo Hair Institute, but I'm also director of Hair Clone. So
yeah.
I'm not offering that as
Mhm,
Dr. Farjo.
mhm,
I am working as part of Hair Clone, and Hair Clone will work on this therapy and on this research, but will not make it available from the Farjo Hair Institute, if you like,
yeah,
until we have reliable results that are worthwhile. I totally agree with you that a treatment has to be worthwhile and competitive with other treatments available. Otherwise, I agree. What's the point?
yeah. What, another question just came in here. Is this technology going to be stolen by a lucrative either Eastern European or Middle Eastern company and sold for half the cost? What are you doing to protect the process legally?
So we have a number of patents that we have put in place, but now we need to work on them to make the treatment become reality. But yeah, in terms of protection, like many people in our position, you apply for patents on the principles that you are talking about. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's a very important distinction that we should make here, so that everyone knows what's clear. It's, Dr. Farjo isn't recommending this treatment in lieu of surgery
No.
until there is more concrete data. However, there is, if you want to take the leap of faith and experiment, and you don't mind, in the
Yeah.
beginning paying a higher cost, then that's something you can look into. And I think it's, a lot of people were talking about exosome therapy, and that was sort of like the higher level of PRP. And I saw some clinics, I'm not going to name names, that were charging as much as a hair transplant.
Mm.
Um, what are your views on exosome therapy and PRP in general?
Exosomes, very interesting. Uh, and I'm sure, like you, I've seen some amazing results, but I don't understand the mechanism of action here. And you need to see larger numbers and more evidence. Um, the one concern we have about exosomes is are you allowed to do it like it? I think a lot of companies are meant to use it topically. You need to apply it to the skin, but a lot of people are actually injecting it, and there's a
Mm,
lot of confusion. As far as many of us understand, it's not licensed to be injected, and I believe the FDA, for example, has been concerned about that. And you have to remember this:
mm,
exosomes They're not autologous. They don't come from the same person. It comes from something else, and therefore you have concerns whether you get complications as a result of that. They are harvested from other humans. So yeah, so that's the difference. But it is very interesting, and we kind of continue to monitor what's going on, and if it's something that is safe and licensed and proven to be of value, then we'd like to offer it to our patients. PRP, yeah, interesting. I've been working with PRP for a while. I'm more of a fan of using PRP as part of the hair transplant procedure rather than as a standalone treatment. I'm even interested in the regenera concept, and I'm hoping that I could start introducing it to our practice, because again, I've seen in some people it seems to produce interesting results. But somebody, a scientist colleague of mine, stood up recently at a meeting and said, it seems that everything we inject seems to be working. Maybe it's not what we inject. Maybe it's just the injection process. Maybe you just need to do derma rolling or microneedling, and maybe that'll produce a similar. Maybe it's all about the needles rather than what's in the system. So and again, I've got colleagues who show me results of microneedling alone, and that looked good.
It's amazing,
So,
yeah. I've seen incredible microneedling. I mean, when in conjunction with minoxidil and microneedling, I've seen just incredible things. You mentioned something that's pretty interesting about the injections. Um, have you tried dutasteride with mesotherapy injections?
Oh, so it's on my list. I've not tried it yet, but again, I've got colleagues who, and in the dermatology circles at the minute, it's gathering pace, and quite a few credible people seem to think, yeah, there's mileage in that one, and it's probably something that I want to introduce soon in our practice. Sure.
Now, I want to ask you something maybe a little bit controversial, and maybe you don't have to answer me, but I think people will like the transparency. What treatments would you say are a bust? What things, what pipeline treatments, in your opinion, do you think don't have any legs or may not go far? You mentioned earlier Replicel, which was one that was gaining a lot of popularity, and it's sort of been dying down.
Well, no, Replicel is not. I don't think it's been available as a treatment. It's still research. It's very similar to hair clone. It's been going a long time, and they're still working on it. And they've sort of subcontracted or allowed another company, Shiseido in Japan, to do some more work on it. And as far as I know, it's still work in progress. So I'm not
mm,
saying that that's a treatment that's gone, but they are trying to do the similar principle. What treatments are definitely no?
there's Stempson's Therapeutics, which is also in the same sort of realm
Yeah,
as you
and that's
guys.
still work in progress, and it's going to be work in progress for quite a long time, I believe. But again, it's interesting and it's exciting. So I wouldn't rule any of these treatments out, really. I mean, the latest one today, a patient told me that a relative of hers in Iran has received biotin intramuscular injections, and it stopped her
Mm.
hair from shedding. And then her mother brought biotin injections from Iran and brought it to the UK without injecting with it. And
Wow.
I said, well, I've heard people doing that, but definitely it's not licensed to be for TVs and that purpose. And I have no idea what I'm doing if I'm doing it, and there's no chance we're going to do that. But I'm happy to just monitor the situation and see what they're talking about. Um, I wouldn't. I can't think of medical grade treatments that I would say definitely stay away from. Everything's possible, but you have to take things with a pinch of salt, and you have to see evidence, and you have to be sensible. And I would try it and test things first, and other stuff it's only just to enhance and to sort of supplement. I
Mm.
mean, I tell all my patients that, to start with, you need the basics. So you need your finasterides, your minoxidil, and get that going. And then if we want to keep pushing the boat out, then we could try and add things to it. But, you need to start with these basic things. And if you've lost almost all your hair in one spot, then I'm afraid nothing that I know of will bring it back short of a hair transplant.
What is your view on, because I think this is also sort of a controversial topic. What's your view on someone who's a Norwood 6 getting on medication? I've seen, obviously, running the forum, there's a lot of people come and they'll be complete Norwood 7s. And a lot of people always say, get on finasteride, get on dutasteride, get on minoxidil, try all these things. And I'm of the opinion that it's sort of like putting fertilizer on a dirt patch.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make any sense, but other people feel differently. What's your view on that?
Um, there has been the odd kind of miracle result, I suppose. Um, if that person is having a hair transplant, I would be in support of them using medication at the same time.
Mm,
I think I've seen enough evidence to suggest that people who have been on medical therapy whilst they've had a transplant and at the same time they're on medical therapy, their transplant seems to age better. It seems to, or the people who come back who've not been on any therapy, say 10, 15, 20 years down the line, there is a there is a more likely deterioration in their
mm,
transplant itself and the little fringes around it. Now, whether you think that's worth your while to be on therapy every day to do that, or you come back in 20 years and have another transplant, that's personal choice. But if somebody used medical therapy just to try and without the transplant and they use it for a year, then after that, if nothing's happening, then I wouldn't have thought there'd be point continuing.
Now, let me ask you this, because there's always conspiracy theories floating around in terms of like hair loss cures and things like that. Um, I think the hair transplant industry surpassed $3 billion last year or something like that. So there's a ton of money in hair restoration, period, whether it's treatments or something like that. A lot of people think, with all this money, why is there not enough funding in these types of projects where, hair loss could potentially be cured? Some people say that it's because, it's not going to be repetitive money. And so because of that, that there's like these blocks and no one has an incentive to really find a cure. Um, You mentioned earlier Intercytex being a victim of lack of funding. And oftentimes, a lot of these startup hair loss companies end up going down because there's not enough funding. Why do you think that is?
It's not just the funding, it's the process. So in the science world, what you do is that you get the funding, you establish your proof of principle in animal, and then you use that principle to start a clinical trial. Now, in a clinical trial, you have to set your stall from the beginning and you say, this is what we're going to do, this is the protocol, and then you proceed. If you find that halfway through your protocol is not working, you cannot just say, okay, give me more money and we'll change the protocol. You have to then abandon and then go back to the beginning and start from scratch. So it's just the process, the time, and the money. I think there is significant money being invested in hair, but you have to remember, hair loss is not necessarily a disease. It's a symptom. There's many reasons why you lose your hair. Um, and it's a complex subject. There's no simple switch to switch, and we know from research there are multiple factors. Yes, we all talk about DHT, but it's
Mm,
there are multiple factors involved. Um, and we're comparing hair loss to what? Like, let's talk about diabetes or thyroid disease or cancer or whatever. We've
yeah,
improved people's lives. We've made them better. We've made people, last longer, but not necessarily cured any of these things. And the same thing with hair loss. We have not great medications. We have fantastic hair transplant techniques. We've got lots of cellular therapies to support us. But I don't think people always ask that, but it's not really fair when you compare it to other health issues. We've not really cured much other than improve our health.
yeah. What do you think? What do you say to the people who believe that there's someone behind the scenes controlling? You know, we can't put this cure out because uh, you know,
Just want to sell more finasteride.
because they want to, because yeah, Merck, or just Merck doesn't want to allow people
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to find a cure because they'll lose their money from Propecia or whatever Johnson and Johnson from Rogaine. They always say that there's these huge, large companies that are making millions of dollars each year, so they have an
No,
incentive not to let a cure come out.
yeah, no, that's categorically not true. I know that because we've been involved in hair research since probably 2000, in with multiple institutions and multiple companies and people working very, very hard for a long time. There's lots of money, lots of scientists pouring into this, and no, it's very complicated. It's very difficult. Um, and we have tons more information that we're used to. I mean, finasteride itself, minoxidil itself, because of all the research work that people put into it. Dutasteride is there, and now we just mentioned exosomes, for example. So there are things happening, but it's too simplistic to think, why don't you just let's all collect money and put tons of money into it and find it. It's not just the lack of money; it is an extremely complex subject and multiple factors at play.
Got it. Now, just before I let you go, Dr. Farjo, I want to ask you one question. All right. What can we realistically expect in the next 10 years? So let's say someone is watching this video and they're 20 years old and they're starting to see their hair thin and they're desperate and rightfully so, going bald young. I went bald young. Devastating. Realistically, what can we expect in the next 10 years in terms of treatment?
I think we can expect the type of treatments that will help a young person who's beginning to lose their hair significantly avoid the prospect of ending up being a Norwood 6, maybe Norwood 7. But we need to catch it at the right time. We need to approach the subject in a scientific way, make sure they establish the basics. We mentioned medical therapy, etc. And I expect in the next 10 years, there are probably enough cell type therapies that should support the hair to sort of keep everything together. Whether we're going to have the technology to treat somebody who's too late for them, gone bald, and then make the hair sprout out of nothing, I don't know. I would have liked to say yes, but I'm way too experienced to say things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I've grown a little cynical, to be honest with you, and that's just from, gosh, searching for these treatments since the 2000s. It's been
Yeah,
almost what 20 years now, and I've
yeah.
I've started balding when 2005. So for me, it's been so long, and it always seems like something's going to come out, and then it fails, and then something else is going to come out, and then it
Mm.
fails, and it just leaves you feeling sort of like I don't know what to believe. So in 10 years, you think that cell therapies, these, hair clone, possibly Replicell, these other cell therapies that are rejuvenating the hair follicles, you think they will be a reality in your
Yeah.
opinion?
Yeah, I think so. Rejuvenating or maintaining. But the crucial bit here is about we need to use these therapies at the right time. There is research to suggest there is a degree of miniaturization of the hair follicle that if you've not caught the follicle at within that point in time, you cannot reverse that process. So you need
Mm,
to catch it at the right time. You need to seek therapy at the right time, and hopefully we'll have these type of cell therapies. If you catch it at the right time, you'll be able to continue to maintain and rejuvenate that hair so that you don't end up in a position where you have to have multiple hair transplant procedures. But even if you've already balded, hopefully not completely, and there'll be areas on your head that you could maintain, and you may need one or two transplant procedures to treat the ones that have gone completely bald at that point, or not completely bald, but beyond that point of no return. Yeah.
and I know that was my last question, but I do one more. We talked about Dr. Barghouti, we talked about verteporfin. I think this is an I haven't been excited about anything, but this is really exciting me because it can help those who are already super bald. So if you're already a Norwood 6, it's not gonna, because you're using this as an adjunct to hair transplantation, Is it something you're considering doing since, you have a great scientist mind and you've been a part of research for a long time? Is it something you're considering, doing a trial for yourself in your practice?
Are you talking about the stuff that
The
Dr. Berkowitz
vertiport
is doing?
Yeah, the
No, I'm
vertiport.
really looking forward to speaking to him, and hopefully I'm hoping to see him next week. Actually, there is a big conference taking place. So my main observation is that I want to figure out whether you inject this into a scalp that's not had FUE, will you produce similar hairs? So stimulating FUE sites to grow hair is something different because those sites did have hair, and when you take out the FUE, you may leave some remnant of the hair behind or a transected follicle, and maybe that's what you're stimulating. But that's not the same as using it to stimulate a naturally bald area at the top. And I'll be looking forward to speaking to him to see if he's done any testing in those kind of sites rather than just the FUE donor sites.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the thread on the forum. He has one that's it's gotten quite big, but they're each three tested sites, all three of them are growing multiple hairs. So at first I thought, well, what if it's everyone said that. Well, the obvious, what if it was a partially transected hair follicle? What if it was a telogen hair follicle? And that was to be expected in the beginning. I was like, well, it might be that. But as I'm seeing multiple hair follicles growing in each side, that's giving me more of, hold on, wait a minute. This, if it was just a telogen, wouldn't be growing in all three sites that are growing at different dosages. So I'm interested for him to talk to you and share
Hmm.
his findings with you, and maybe we can all do a conference. I'm considering doing one next year for the next ISHRS, and I won't be able to do one this year because my baby's going to be born literally any day now. I
Oh,
was I was
congratulations in advance! Yeah.
Thank you. I was actually worried that I wasn't going to be able to do this podcast because of that, but
Oh,
luckily, luckily
yeah.
I was able to do it. But next year, I'm considering doing a conference and having these pipeline things presented for the community. So for patients, I know a lot of conferences always focus on presenting it to other physicians and clinics, but there's not a lot of information out there for the average person. So that's what I'm looking to do
Well,
next year.
I'm on the organizing committee of a big hair research conference in the UK next June, and that's the conference where people like us and Replicell and all that can present that more like hair, what the future might hold.
Mm.
Um, so that might be an interesting one. That's in June in the UK in Sheffield. It's the European Hair Research Society, and a lot of this kind of stuff we've been talking about gets presented over there. But you'll be surrounded by scientists and the people asking, interesting questions about the explanation for these things. But hopefully, I'll see Dr. Taylor next week. I've been meaning actually to ask me. Like I've seen some of the slides, but I couldn't quite understand. I didn't have time to read what he was uh, researching. I don't believe he's speaking on the subject, but if I see him, I'm sure we'll have a private chat and he can explain to me what he's doing, and we can perhaps have a three-way Insta live next time around. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that Paul just joined right now, and I want to respect your time, and I know it's been now over an hour, but yeah, hopefully next time we can do it, and we'll have Paul there,
Yeah.
Taleb, you, anyone else that you feel that would be of interest in these pipeline treatments, because at the end of the day, our community is always interested in not just hair transplants, but what is going to be the future, what's going to be out there. And we like to be ahead of that and at least have this information available for the masses so someone can just come on our Instagram and look at this entire live and interact with us and get questions answered. So yeah, hopefully let me know about that conference. I would love to attend if I'm able to. I know you're also with the ISHRS, and so um,
So this
is are you?
conference next week is the ISHRS conference. It's the Panama. It's the World Congress of the
Yeah,
ISHRS
in
is
Panama.
next week.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's the one that's happening next month, right? But I unfortunately I won't be able to tend to that one. But next year,
you've got more important things.
I've got my handful. But next year, I'm definitely going to go. And I think it's going to be in Delhi, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah, in
next
Delhi.
year. Yeah. So next year, I would love to have a nice circle and panel and have live on YouTube, Instagram, multiple channels, and we'll really reach out to the masses and hopefully we'll have some more information to present. And hopefully, I don't know if it's possible, but maybe Hair Clone can have something to present. Maybe there'll be more people.
Hopefully, it's another 12 months from now, and extremely hopeful that we'll have more information by then, and to carry on from the conversation we've been having tonight. Yeah.
Before I let you go, for anyone who's watching this, who's like, look, I'm in the UK, I'm interested in this treatment. I got, I have the money to, available, and I want to try it. Who can they contact to get more information?
So the most important thing is that if they're interested in this, they need to have a chat, have a consultation. And the point is, it's not about, I want this treatment. It's about, having a consultation to see how we can help their hair loss concern. If they are a candidate for this kind of treatment, we can discuss it. But yeah, they can contact me, because Hair Clone does not deal with patients. Hair Clone, if you like, is like, it's like the pharmaceutical company. They deal with a doctor. So they can contact our practice, Farjo Hair Institute. You can go to farjo.com, and they'll be able to either send an email or have a chat or phone. All the information is there.
And if they want to email you, would it be info@farjohairinstitute.com?
No, the email address is restore@farjo.com.
Restore@farjo.com.
Yeah.
So if you guys want to, submit a consultation and see if maybe you're a candidate for this, restore@farjo.com.
Yeah.
Follow him at Farjo Hair Institute here on Instagram. Thank you again, Dr. Farjo, for this amazing conversation, and hopefully we can meet again soon. If possible, next at the conference in Panama. We'll see. I'll have to see how things are going with the baby, but if we can do one with Taleb and a couple of other people, that would be fantastic.
That would be great. Yeah.
So we'll do that. All right, Dr. Farjo. Well, thank you again.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure. And best wishes for the newcomer. Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. Till next time.
Bye-bye.